Going live. Good morning. All right, I'm live. Who's there? Who's coming? Who's joining? Trying to set up my gadgets. Good morning, Amanda and Martha. And 6 others. All right. Good morning, Kim. All right. Nobody on the YouTube this morning. 0. Usually we've had a couple right off the bat. Hope nothing's screwed up over there. And I'm getting no words, and I know you guys are putting words on there. You guys always say good morning, and I'm not seeing them, so I got to go open this. Good morning, Pat. John, Stephanie, good to see you guys. All right. Here we go. Here we go. Another day. What's today? Thursday? Good morning, Luke. I was sitting there looking at GM. GM. What is GM? This generation of abbreviating everything. It means good morning. I figured it out. Don't worry. I translated. Good morning, Mela. All right. Give me a second here because currently Facebook is not showing me. There we go. On my phone. Sometimes your comments on Facebook come up on my phone. Sometimes they do not. Today they do not. So I have to bring up my computer if I want to see you guys leave comments. Well, here we are, another day. There's a few of us here. It is 6:02. It's been raining here in San Diego, and it is going to be 80 degrees on Saturday. So feel really bad for me. I'm sorry that you're not feeling well, Martha. All right. Good morning, Alicia. Yeah, it'll be 80 degrees on Saturday, but I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this on the week of the 21st, 22nd. That week I'm going to be headed to Chicago, where it will not be 80 degrees, and I am not yet certain if I'm going to be able to take you guys with me to Chicago. It's going to be later time zone. I'm going to be with some other guys in a hotel. And man, I'm just thinking it would be so cool to be able to to keep this thing going while I'm in Chicago. I think that'd be super cool to not just cut it off because I'm there, but I'm not sure how I'm going to pull it off. So we may all gamble together by setting our alarms and trying to make it happen. I'm also thinking it's going to be more difficult to take both YouTube and Facebook, and so I may only be able to take one to the other. Maybe I'll do some kind of special thing that week, and I'll just do it, so we'll break away from our regular scheduled broadcast. Morning, Michael, and maybe we'll do something different so that the YouTube crowd will not miss, the verse by verse thing that we're doing. But there will be something that you have to be on Facebook to do. I don't know. I'm just thinking ahead because I think it's going to be. I'm not sure if Chicago is 2 hours or 3 hours different. So it's either going to be 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. for me if I do that. So just giving you guys a heads up and rambling as people are coming on as I try to do. Kim says, stop bragging about my 80 degrees. Amanda's trying really hard to feel sad for me, but it's not working as she sits in the snow. Oh, I heard it was raining up at your place too, though, Amanda. I heard that you guys were getting rain, but when they get rain in the winter, it's much different than when we get rain in the winter. When we get rain in the winter, it just means that you probably don't want to wear your flip-flops that day. So, yeah, loving it here, San Diego. It's good life. Anyway, here we are, guys. We've got 18 people currently on here, and they're saying, "Shut up, Jonathan. We don't care about weather. Let's talk about Jesus." So let's get into that. All right. Lord, we are grateful for your word. I'm grateful for these guys who get up with me in the mornings. Lord, I pray for Martha, who's not feeling well this morning. This has been going around. We just pray that you would just give her comfort today and just heal her in this time, Lord. I know that there are others that are kind of going through some sickness, and so we just pray that you would just be with them today as well, those that are there listening. Lord, we pray that you would speak through your word today, that you would teach us. Give me wisdom what to do when I'm in Chicago. Lord, I really enjoy this crew of people. So just bless them, continue to bless them. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, here we go. Also, we are doing our podcast. I recorded another podcast yesterday with Jack, but our podcast goes up on Tuesday. If you're following along with that, there is a new one that went up this week. Check it out if you haven't already. It's called 10 Steps Further. It's a lot different than this. It's not just me rambling, but it's truly we've got Jack and usually Chad, and I think we're going to do one with our friend Leslie. One of the number one requests that we've gotten with our podcast is, man, can you guys get a woman's perspective once in a while? Because it's kind of becoming this kind of guys group, and we talk about things that don't relate to women at all. And so, I mean, they're spiritual things, but just the context is so different. So we're going to bring in Leslie, hopefully sometime soon. But be checking out on that, checking in on that. It's fun to do it. We love doing it. People who are listening to it are liking it. So I encourage you guys to check it out. 10 Steps Further. You find it on iTunes. My mission today is to try to figure out how to get it up on some other podcast sites. We'll see how that goes. All right, guys. Boom. Enough plugs of that kind of stuff. Okay, I got some crazy ambition. I've got like 23 minutes before I intend to stop. And I have given myself the entire rest of the chapter 23 to get through. This isn't going to happen. I really have no actual belief that this is going to happen. But here we go. I didn't know where to cut it off, so I just put the whole chapter. So here we go. Ready? Verse 13, Jesus is giving, if you remember, he's giving his final sermon before the crucifixion. And he knows that this is basically the last message that he's going to give before he goes to the cross. He's speaking to the crowds. He's speaking to the disciples. He's just been tested by religious people, by political people. They've come to him with questions. Hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar or should we not? What's the greatest of the commandments that God has given to us? Is there a resurrection? They've come and they've asked him these types of questions, and he confounded every single one of them. He answered them with great wisdom, and they could not trick him or trap him as they intended to. And then he turns the tables and he begins to speak to the crowds and to the disciples. And this is his last message. And the question is, what would you give if you knew it was your last message? Well, it doesn't matter what you would give. Jesus is smarter than you. And so Jesus begins to give his last message. And it's interesting because Jesus, in his last message, begins to dig in to the religious system pretty harshly. He begins to really deface the Pharisees and the religious system of his day. He's not holding back at all in this, and he's just really calling out publicly the religious leaders. Now, this definitely will not play into his favor as far as if his goal was to live a long life, because they've already been plotting how they're going to kill him, and this is pushing them over the edge for sure. And so he is just going after the Pharisees. And so here we go, verse 13. He says, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." Now, he calls them hypocrites. Here's what I love about how Jesus will multiple times in this section call the scribes and Pharisees hypocrites. We live in a day where maybe the number one accusation against religious people is hypocrisy. I was in a discussion yesterday with a friend of mine, and we were talking about a pastor that we both knew of that several years ago. You know, he was a very effective, very well-known pastor in certain circles, and word came out that he had been cheating on his wife, multiple affairs, all this. So obviously he lost the ability to lead his church, and he was ousted from leadership in the church. You know, they're not going to follow this guy's lead anymore. But what was really sad about it was, that was sad in itself, but then before that, when he was still in his ministry, there were other people who were really caught doing the same thing, cheating and having affairs and doing all this kind of stuff, and he was very outspoken against them. He was one who was calling them out in their sin very publicly, and then it turns out he was doing the same thing all the time, all the while. That is hypocrisy. So what I love about what Jesus is doing with this word hypocrisy is we have that in our culture to say, you know, man, religious people, there's so many hypocrites in the church, there's so many hypocrites out there, and there is truth to that, but Jesus was the one who started the trend of calling them hypocrites. Jesus was the one. So even when the guy who wants to have nothing to do with Christian church is calling the church hypocrites, he's truly echoing Jesus. I find that interesting, that Jesus really hated hypocrisy. The world around hates hypocrisy. It's not even so much sin that we hate as much as it's the pretending. Hypocrisy is this idea of being an actor, a stage actor. You're playing a part. You do the things for show. That's the way these guys were. It's common even today that we just do it for show. We do it for pretense. We do it for reputation. We do it for money. There's so many other reasons to be the Apostle Paul will call people out for saying, hey, there are those who are seeking to live a godly life because they think it's a means of gain. Now, here we have, I'm sorry, I get these things that distract me once in a while. I forget to turn them off, these email notices. I'm like, oh, I got an email notice. So we live in this day where there are people that believe, hey, if I do this in the Christian realm, if I do this in the religious circles, the Christian people or religious people are maybe gullible, or maybe they're just more generous, and so I can benefit in large part from ministering to this group of people. I've heard it in the music industry. Man, it's much easier to make it in the Christian music industry than it is to make it in the real world secular music industry. And so there are many people who are under the Christian label singing songs about Jesus who themselves really don't care anything about Jesus. I knew a guy, a pastor whose son was touring with a lot of the mainstream Christian bands out there. This was a long time ago. And he said, he really wasn't interested in it. Like, he just kind of dropped off of it because he's like, man, these Christian bands have very little desire after God. There really is very little Christian godly motivation. They just know that it's an industry where they can make good money, and so they're playing the part. It's hypocrisy. Now, I don't know which bands it is, and I know some of them are not that way and some of them are that way, but I just want to, for the points of this, here Jesus is calling out the Pharisees, saying, hypocrites, you're hypocrites. For you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who enter to go, who would enter to go in. So the Pharisees, they themselves are missing the kingdom of God. They're not really submitted to the authority of God. They're not really following the heart of God. And not only that, but they are keeping other people out. And he's going to go on and explain how that goes. For woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across the sea and land to make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. So these guys, they're into foreign missions. They go overseas to preach their message. They travel to share what they believe, or I don't know. They go to share God with people around the world. And here Jesus is saying, when you travel, you're traveling to foreign lands, you're traveling across the sea, you're taking boats, ships, today planes. You're going to these places and you're making converts, people who look like you, and in the process, they're missing it because you're missing it. And you're spreading a message that is not the message that's going to bring people into the kingdom of God. you're spreading a message that's going to keep people out of the kingdom of God. One of the things that we find is the message that goes around telling people to clean up their act is a message that will not be followed. You will have people try harder. The message of try harder is going to cause people to fail. When you go to church, and I encourage you to go to church. When you go to church and you listen to the message at your church, listen for that subtle message of try harder, do better. Listen to that message because that message is the message I believe that the Pharisees would teach. The Pharisees made it look like when they would stand in front of people, they would make it look like, hey, be more like me. Be more like me, your spiritual leader, your religious guru. Be more like me. And it's the very message that will cause people to fail for a couple of reasons. One, because the guy who's standing in front of you is not who you think he is. He's not as good and holy as you think he is. And so if you try to be more like him, you're trying to be like somebody who's not even really like he looks like he is. I hope that made sense. He's truly not the one you think he is. And so as you step out and you compare yourself to a false image, it's kind of like they talk about the magazine covers with the beautiful people on them, the workout magazines, and you see them and you're eating what they're telling you to eat in the magazine, and you're doing the workout like they're telling you to do in the magazine, and you look at the cover and you're just like, man, I just want to look like that. Well, here's the thing. The person on the cover doesn't look like that. The person that is a hypocritical image. That is a fake image. The reality of it is that like even I think of the movie Wolverine. I liked that movie. I like Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman, he worked out really, really hard. He ate really, really clean. And then he had a scene where he's going to take his shirt off and show all the muscles that he developed. And what did he do? He fasted from food and water for 30 hours. So even after he got in great shape, and before that scene, he fasted for 30 hours, no water, no food, so completely dehydrated, terrible headache. And then he takes a can of Coca-Cola and he pops it open and he downs the can of Coca-Cola. Why? Because when he does that, it causes all his veins to pop out. It's a bodybuilder trick. It causes his body to just look awesome, but it also causes him to feel absolutely terrible. And then they film the scene and he looks amazing. And then when you watch the movie, even after all of that, and they filmed it and they had a great cameraman do all the work, well, then it goes into editing, and in editing they bring up the contrast so it causes the shadows to look all the more awesome, and man, he looks really good. And so then I go out there and I go hit the gym and I'm like, well, Hugh Jackman did deadlifts, I'm gonna go do some deadlifts, and I start doing deadlifts and looking in the mirror and like, why don't I look like Hugh Jackman? Here's why: because I'm eating food, I'm drinking water, I don't have a cameraman editing the clip. I don't look as awesome because he doesn't look like that ever. He doesn't walk around looking like he did in that scene. It's an artificial, hypocritical image. And they say, that's leading to a lot of the reasons why there's some health issues in the fitness industry that have been there for the last 30, 40 years, because the magazine cover is manipulated. The movie scene is manipulated. You will die if you continue on that road of trying to look like that. And that's exactly what's going on here. These guys are portraying an image of spirituality that isn't real. It isn't real. It's only outward. It's only for the moment. And so as a result of that, they travel around and they say, be more like me. And they try to win converts so that people will try to be more spiritual as they appear spiritual. And these people are bound to fail. Hope that all followed. Give me a, if you followed that, give me a thumb or a heart or a face of some kind. I like when those come up. But you may be giving them to me, and Facebook may not be working right today. So here we go. For you travel, there we go. Where are we at? Verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. This is kind of silly. They have this Simon Says thing going on with their swearing. If you swear by the temple, no big deal. You can break your oath. Nobody cares. The temple's not that important. But if you swear by the gold of the temple, now the gold has value, so the gold of the temple, if you swear by that, you better keep your oath. It's a big deal. Okay. And he says, you blind fools, for which is greater, the gold of the temple that has made, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? You say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by the oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it, and whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. So they have this. Pat says he's picking up what I'm putting down. Awesome. Go buy a Mac, Pat. Go buy a Mac. Here we have. So we have they have this weird thing where they're saying, hey, if I swear an oath and I'm like, hey, I swear by the temple or I swear by the altar, no big deal. But if I swear by the gift on the altar, man, I better keep my oath. If I swear by the gold of the temple, it's the gold that makes the temple valuable. They're missing it. Okay, so I'm going to break this down to the best that I can understand it. We live in a time even now where we think the substance is the external, that the substance is of material value. We do that, I think, even now, where we say, man, if I go to a third world country and I feed hungry people, the feeding the hungry, and this is a big debate, and there are going to be people who are going to disagree with me, people that I love and care about that are close to me, but I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to go to a third world country, and I'm going to feed hungry people, and I'm also going to give them the gospel in the process. There are many who believe that the feeding the hungry people is more valuable than the ministry of the gospel that I would give to them. There are many people who believe that the material, if I go and I build a house, as I went to Belize, we built a house, that building, or we added to a house, that building a house is more valuable than the spiritual need. That the underlying spiritual value is not as great as the material value. That in the temple, the fact that God called them to build the temple, that the temple is a place of worship, was not as valuable to them as the fact that the temple was made of gold. Okay, so same as the altar. We say, hey, my gift that I would put on the altar, the sacrifice that I'm making is greater than the altar. The altar is the place where God receives the gift. The altar. Okay, so let's boil this all down to what I think it is and move on. Ready? I'm convinced is this, that the spiritual thing, that the work that God is doing is greater than the work that I'm doing. The gift that I'm putting on the altar is very insignificant in comparison to the altar itself that is God's altar. The gold, the value of the gold. So here's the thing, the temple has more value as a temple than it does if you tear it down and you just take the gold that is in it and that is from it. And as a matter of fact, they did that. I think it was 70 AD. They came in and they destroyed the temple, and there was not a stone left upon another stone. And Jesus prophesied that was going to happen. And the reason why is because the stones had gold around them. And so they would come and they would chisel out all of the gold because they valued the gold. But I tell you what, the temple was of more value than the gold had the temple stayed standing. And so when we see the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, even if the parts are made of gold. I hope that you're tracking with that, picking up what I was putting down, Pat. So here we go. Good morning, Judy, and good morning, Josh Hardy. Love you guys. Josh Hardy, I always get super excited to see your name pop up on there, man. Speaking of people who build houses. So here we go. Keep going further. Verse 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others, you blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. So here he gets into these religious guys, they're tithing. And man, they love to tithe, and they love to do it outwardly. They love it when people can pay attention to how much they're given. They love to tell people how much they're giving. But it's not only the massive amounts, like, oh, I gave $10,000 last month. It's not even that. It's like, but my discipline of tithing is so intense that I go home and, man, if I got a carrot, I cut a tenth of that carrot off and I give that tenth of that carrot to God, and then I only have 9/10 of the carrot for myself. And if anything that I get, if I buy something, I give 10% of it to God. And they're so disciplined that they're even going into their spices and with the salt shaker, and they take a 9 grains of salt, and then they give a 10th grain of salt to God. And they're so rigid in their tithing. But he says, but you're missing the greater thing. You've neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. In the Bible, and even in the book of Corinthians, it talks about if you speak in the tongues of men and angels, if you have faith that can move mountains, but you don't have love, you're just noisy. That's all. You're just noisy. You're missing the greater thing. Here he's saying, man, you're doing all of the things. You're going to church on Sunday. You're tithing of your income to the last penny. You are doing all of the religion. You're not wearing a bikini when you go to the beach. You're buttoning the top button. You're tucking in your shirt. You're wearing your good clothes. You don't wear jeans with holes in them when you go to church. You got all these rules that you're following, but you're missing the main thing. You're missing mercy. You're missing justice. You're missing faithfulness. You're missing the things that actually matter. And then he says, look, these you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Huh. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. You're focused on all the wrong stuff, is what he's saying to him. Man, that tends to be religious people. This is a sad thing, right? When you read the words of Jesus, when you read the words of Paul, when you go through and you sit like we're sitting in the Bible and you go through it, one of the things that you see is Jesus showed so much love. Jesus showed so much mercy, grace. He stood up for the cause of those who needed him to stand for them. So he was into justice. He was not allowing for injustice to happen, but he was merciful. He was gracious. He was good. He was loving. The Christian church today is not known for those things. The Christian church today is known for, in large part, you're not dressing right, you're not talking right, you're not eating the right foods, you're smoking too much of this, drinking too much of that. We got all these rules that we're doing, and we're not known for our mercy. We're not known for grace. We're not known. Now, some are. For sure, some are, but he's saying, listen, you're straining out a gnat and you're swallowing a camel. I love this. I wonder if he got a chuckle. I always kind of wonder if different, you ever watch like, the thought that came in my head. You ever watch TV shows from a culture that is not your own, especially a comedy? I remember growing up, we always had PBS, and on PBS they would play like either Canadian or English sitcoms. And you turn it over there and you just watch these sitcoms and you're just like, man, nothing on this is funny. There's nothing funny about it. These are comedies, but they're just not funny. And I'm sure that people from around the world watch American sitcoms and they're just like, these just aren't funny. But there's a certain humor that goes with your culture. And so I kind of wonder, was this a thing where Jesus was being humorous and setting this picture of you strain out a gnat and you swallow a camel, where there's smiles that go around the room where he's speaking? Because I do think that this is a humorous picture, this idea of straining out a gnat, swallowing a camel. Man, you're missing the little things, or you're doing the little things and you're missing the massive thing. Let's go a little further. I know it's 6:30, but let's see how far we can get. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, and the outside, that the outside also may be clean. We so easily get consumed with the outward. We want people to look at us in a certain light. We want people to look at us in a certain way, but we get so consumed with the outward, and so we play the part. You know, we got to put our makeup on and put our best dress on before we go to church, especially. But oftentimes, even before we go to the grocery store, we don't want people to see us as we really are. If we invite people over, we don't want them to see the house as it really is. We want to make sure everything's clean. So me and my kids, and my wife does 99.9999% of all of it. But then, it's like, oh, people are coming over. Mom's going to get upset if the place isn't clean. And so we try to pick some stuff up, clean some stuff up, present the best that we can. And is that terrible? Probably not. But here's the thing. When the work comes inside of us, the outside gets cleaned up. When we focus on the outside, we're just hypocrites. We're just faking it. But if we focus on the inside, if we focus on the reality, if we focus on the who I really am, man, the outside kind of takes care of itself, doesn't it? I mean, as I come close to God, as I draw near to the Lord, as I truly seek to be what He's called me to be, then even if I don't look the part on the outside, truly it's doing an effect. It's changing me. And the outside, I take my coffee cup. Look at this. Look at this. Jack bought me this, or he had these made. That's my podcast, 10 Steps Further podcast. If I clean the inside of the cup, I put it in the water, not dishwasher, but actually in the sink, and I wash out the inside of the cup. Most of the time, unless there's a whole bunch of nasty on the outside of the cup, most of the time I don't even think about washing and scrubbing the outside as much as I'm really focused on the inside. And yet, when I go and put it in the cupboard because it's clean, when I go and put it in the cupboard, the outside of the cup is pretty much clean because it was in the soapy water and it was just affected by what happened on the inside, right? That's what Jesus is saying. Focus on the inside. The outside will take care of itself. The outside will get clean just as a result of what's going on the inside. But imagine if I just, instead of even dipping the cup in the water, if I just grabbed a rag and I just cleaned off the outside and made it look clean, and then I put it in the cupboard, and then you came over to have some coffee, and I poured it in there, man, it wouldn't taste as good, and it definitely wouldn't be as good for you. There'd be some nasty floating in the inside, and then that would go inside of you, and that would be bad, and you'd be mad at me. So let's get past that. Verse 27, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Man, he's just going after him. I think he says it 8 times. Woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. He's just going, this is his message. This is his main point. Woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Religious people, you're just actors. And then he says, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within you are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. You also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So what's he saying? He's saying, listen, you're faking the whole thing. You look like graves. You look like tombs. You look like, you go to a cemetery and you're like, man, this place looks beautiful. But underneath, in the ground, what's there? Dead people, rotting flesh. That's what's there. And he's like, yeah, you look beautiful, but you're truly just rotting flesh. You're truly just dead on the inside. It's almost like he's elevating it as he goes. Like, you guys, you want to appear beautiful, but truly there's no life in you. Verse 29, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. Now, you got to understand this. Every one of the prophets were killed by their own people. The Jewish people, the prophets would come to correct them, to draw them back to God, and pretty much every single one of them, or many of them, were killed by their own people because their own people didn't want to have anything to do with them. But then every generation after would say, well, that was a prophet of God, and had we been there, we wouldn't have done that, right? I mean, here's the thing. Don't we do the same thing? I mean, we can look back at history and we can say, how could a nation of people have owned other people? How is it that we could have taken people who had a different color of skin and we could have like made slaves out of them and forced them to do all of the tasks that we didn't want to do? How could we have done that? And then we would say, well, if I was living back in that day, I would have been one of the people who would not have gone along with that. It's easy to say because we're not in that day, but yet in today's day, we tend to, I believe that there are things that many of us are part of, that there will be a future generation that will be like, man, I would have known so much better than you guys do. I look at like Nazi Germany and I'm like, how did Hitler get an entire nation of people to stand against and to kill millions of Jews? How did he do that? Where he could drag people out of a home. And we say, man, I would have stood up. Had I lived in that day, I would have been one of the heroes. That's what these guys were saying. Man, I would have listened to the prophet if I lived back in that day. I don't know. I wouldn't be so sure. Because here's the thing. Here's the thing. Are we in this generation right now with all the things that are going on? Are we a people who checks ourselves? Are we a people who stands and looks at ourselves from the outside and asks the question, am I doing the right thing? Is my view right? Am I treating people properly? Or here's the thing, am I just a puppet of my news program? Am I just a puppet of the media? Am I just following what my group of people thinks is the case? Am I just listening and responding? Because if I lived back then and I did then what I do now, which is most of us, all we do is we pick CNN or we pick Fox. It doesn't matter which one. And then we just become a puppet of the one that we listen to. We get liberal or we get conservative, but we just become a puppet of the one that we listen to. And so weirdly, if we believe that it's okay to have an abortion, we also believe that it's okay to marry somebody of the same sex, and we also believe that you shouldn't be able to have a gun. Those things should not be connected, but they are, because we're just a puppet of the media. Now, here's the other side of it. If we believe that you shouldn't have an abortion, we also believe that you shouldn't marry somebody of the same sex, and we also believe that you should be able to have a gun. Those things should not be connected. They shouldn't, and that's just three of all of the things. I mean, for some, like whether or not you believe somebody should have a gun should have very little to do with what your view is on border control. It should have very little to do with how tax money's spent. It shouldn't be just that we're a puppet of one brand or the other. It should be that every single issue we should bring before God, and we should check ourselves, and we should say, truly, God, is this where you would have me to stand on this issue? Is it possible that the ones that I'm listening to, the voices that I'm listening to, are right in some things and wrong in other things, and that it's really for me to take before God and to say, Lord, I don't want to be one who just goes along with a culture that crucifies prophets or that makes slaves out of other people or kills people because of their, because they're Jews. Because that is, every generation does exactly that. Every generation, just the majority of people, almost everybody, the majority of people just go along with the people around them. That's how riots happen. Riots happen, you get a group of people and they get set off, and you get in there, and all of a sudden the hysteria causes you to get hysterical, and you just go along with what the crowd is doing. And it's very, very common and very, very easy. And we think, and we would say, as these guys would say, well, if I lived in that day, I wouldn't have done what they do. And I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure I would have. If I was, living in 1940, 1920, what would my view have been on racism at the time? Where would I have stood? If I was I've got actually a German last name, not sure what all my roots are, but here's the thing. If I was living in Nazi Germany during World War II, who would I have been? As they're dragging my neighbor out of their house and taking him down, and they're never to be seen again because they're taking him to a gas chamber. Who would I have been in that moment? Would I have been one who just accepts, because here's what we do. There's a book I read. It's 6:40. I'm still going. I apologize. There's a book that I read, and they did this test. They did this study where they had smoke coming out from under a doorway. The book is called Influence. You can look it up. But they had smoke coming out from under a doorway, and they wanted to see how people would respond. And as the smoke's coming out from under the doorway, you would walk by, and most people who would see the smoke would respond to the smoke by examining it. They would go and they would make sure everybody's okay. It looks like the house on the inside is on fire. We want to make sure nobody's in there. We want to protect whoever's in there. And so, there's smoke coming out. We're gonna fix the situation. At the very least, we're gonna go get help. Most people did the right thing, but here's what they did. Then they set up the same scenario: smoke coming out from under the doorway, and then they had people walking back and forth in front of the doorway, acting as if there was no smoke, just to see how the person who was not part of the whole thing. They wanted to see how you would respond if you walked by and you saw smoke coming out from under the doorway, but everybody walked by as if it wasn't. They wanted to see how you would respond, and they found that the majority of people walked as everybody else did. They saw the smoke, but they looked around and they saw that everybody who was walking by seemed to think it wasn't a big deal, and so they ignored it. That's what is in us. We may see something wrong, but if everybody in our circle says it's right, then we ourselves oftentimes will just say, well, then it must be right. I think that's as far as we're going to get today. I'm way over on my time. I got kids I got to make sure are getting to school. Got things going on. We've got a handful of verses left in chapter 23 that we'll pick up with tomorrow. Maybe get into chapter 24 tomorrow. Chapter 24 is going to be a little bit different. Chapter 24, he starts prophesying. He starts taking us into what the end of the world looks like and all that kind of stuff. And so some of that's over my head, but we're going to talk about it anyway because that's what we do. Thank you guys for staying on with me long. I know it's like we're like almost 15 minutes over on time, but I felt like this message is really hitting home with some of the stuff that I see. So I hope you guys were spoken to by it. God bless you guys. Hopefully you'll get up with me tomorrow, 6 a.m., doing it again. Thank you, Susan. All right. Love you guys. See you tomorrow. God bless. I will enjoy the warm weather, Pat. See you guys later.